Hello, everyone, and this is Wider Angle. My today's guest is Danielle J. Lindemann, a sociologist who studies gender, sexuality, the family, and culture, particularly as they relate to occupations. And she is currently an associate professor of sociology at Lehigh University. The author of 3 books, Danielle will be speaking today with us about one of the latest ones. It is The True Story, What Reality TV Says About Us. It's a fascinating insight into reality TV with a great variety of subgenres, as I've learned, from dating shows, docusoaps, makeover programs, and a lot more that Danielle will tell us about, and how it changed or remade the entertainment and cultural landscape in the US. But we will speak a little bit about what happens outside of US as well. Let's get started. Danielle, welcome to Wider Angle.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Of course. You start your book with an exercise. You have like 2 lists, and in one column A, one participant should write as many current US Supreme Court justices just up top of one's head. And then in the column B, you ask the participants to name as many Kardashians as they know. And so what are you trying to get at with that exercise?
So the object of the exercise is not to kind of throw my students under the bus if they can't name all the Supreme Court justices, or if they name more Kardashians than justices, which inevitably they do, right? Most people name more Kardashians than not all, but most name more Kardashians than justices. So the object isn't to sort of ridicule them, right? But it's to sort of think about the cultural salience of reality TV, really, and kind of what a cultural juggernaut it is. And the kind of things that we value as a culture and the things that we don't. So there are multiple objects in that exercise, but one of the things is to just get them thinking about reality TV as a cultural object. And, whether you like it or not, whether you think it's junk or whether you love it, you have to acknowledge that it is this really huge force in contemporary culture, and it's something that needs to be looked at.
And so how did this genre emerge? It was fascinating. You provide one statistics, for example, that we learned in the book, that of the top 400 shows that aired on US television in 2017, 188 were reality TV. That was wow. And so obviously it's a huge aspect of media consumption and supply. So I was just also wondering, can you tell us what historical reasons allowed it to take off in that way?
Yeah, I think different people pinpoint the sort of origins of the genre in different places. A lot of people kind of trace it back to that first episode of The Real World in New York City, which really pioneered a lot of the kind of aspects of the genre that exists today, like the kind of talking head aspect where the person is being interviewed about the action that's on the screen, the kind of serialized structure where a narrative unfolds over a set of episodes over the course of a season. But some people trace it back further to like the dating games of the 60s and things like that. I think one of the things that's enabled reality TV to really flourish is that, from a cost benefit analysis, it really benefits the networks because it's relatively cheap to produce. You often don't have to pay the performers anything. Sometimes the crews oftentimes don't make union wages. You don't have to build expensive sets. So oftentimes they're just really quick and cheap to produce. So from the supply side, it kind of makes sense that these shows would be proliferating.
And you do say that, you inform us that it's still, despite its overwhelming presence, so to speak, it is often ridiculed form of entertainment. And despite that, it's, of course, as you mentioned, reality TV is this trend or phenomenon that can illuminate our experiences. And you, as a sociologist, explain how that manifests in terms of social forces, as you say. So I was wondering, can you tell us a little bit more about what you argue here?
Sure. So sort of the main argument of the book is kind of right. We might just be tempted to look at reality TV as like just a guilty pleasure or something silly, even if we like it, right? We might just think of it as something kind of just fun that exists in our spare time. But I argue that it's important to look critically at reality TV because it's kind of a funhouse mirror. It's kind of an exaggerated it shows us many of our social norms, our processes, our conventions in kind of exaggerated form. And oftentimes it's by kind of tracing the contours of those exaggerated caricatures that we can actually come to a better understanding of ourselves and our own everyday lives.
Yeah, and you tell us also, if I'm not wrong, that we should take reality TV seriously because it also tells us about much more than our individual lives, right?
Right. So when I say ourselves, right, I'm a sociologist. So I mean, right, like
Mhm.
as a society, the groups in
Right.
which, not just us individually, right, but the
Mhm.
groups in which we're embedded. Absolutely, it teaches us about, the widespread inequalities that exist in our
Mhm.
culture by race, class, and gender. It teaches us about the little groups that we form, right, families, friend groups. It teaches us about, how we conceive of, how we think about mothers and fashion and sports
Mhm.
and immigration, right? So almost nearly every aspect of life is touched on in reality TV in this kind of magnified form.
Hmm. And you did mention a little bit right now, which, I mean, each chapter, I read the book, but just for the listeners and viewers, which of the themes, sociological themes, did you focus on? Did you choose to focus on? Because I'm sure there could have been more of them. Because you also tell us how it magnifies of the contours of cultural landscape, and so in detail, which chapters, what did the chapters reveal? Which themes, sociological themes, did you kind of go in depth?
Yeah, so I say sort of in the introduction that the book it's not really a love letter to reality TV, even though I am a fan of reality TV and I
Mm-hmm.
position myself that way in the book, but it's really a love letter to sociology. I really want people to sort of come away from the book entertained, yes, but also with sort of a decent grasp of sort of the basic, principles and theories that kind of outline this discipline of sociology, of which I'm a part. So that's sort of how the book is structured, looking at some of the sort of basic kind of tenets and subfields in sociology, starting at kind of the smallest social unit, which I start with a chapter on the individual and how the individual, how society impacts what's in our minds. And then I kind of broaden out to larger and larger social groups. So looking at like little friend groups and, like on
Mm-hmm.
Survivor and groups of two and groups of three, broadening out to families. And then finally broadening out to kind of our largest social groupings by gender, by race, by class, and by sexuality, and by what reality TV can teach us about those things.
Yeah, and then you also show us how those are intertwined, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
For
they're not
instance,
you
yeah.
you can't talk about gender, race, sexuality independently, right? They're all interwoven.
Yeah, exactly. And there were parts also about immigration, economics. It's really all there, and makes connections that are sometimes obvious, but sometimes we don't consciously think about it or are not aware of it, in the sense that you made me think about, you said we watched this, and then what does reality TV do to us? Because you explained to the readers of your book that it's not just a passive experience, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Right, it's interesting because some of us watch, I mean, myself included, right? We watch reality TV because it's relaxing maybe. We don't have to think too deeply about it. But in some ways, we're actually more engaged with these programs than we are with scripted TV. Like, we literally get to vote on the outcomes sometimes.
Mm.
There's this sort of multi-platform approach that has always characterized reality TV, where you're engaging with the stars, not just on the TV shows, but you're going off the show and you're buying their products, you're playing their video games, you're listening to their music. Then you're, now that the advent of social media, you're tweeting them and retweeting them, right? So in some ways, we're actually more actively engaged with reality TV than we are kind of other forms of media.
Yeah, it's as you yourself write, what did you, it was like real people responding to real world stimuli. Except that there is the media aspect of it that kind of manipulates us in a way that we respond to different triggers, I guess, or the way that it's put out in terms of intergroup conflict, for example, or on Survivor, or different shows. So how are we then? You explain to us what does it do to us, but then what do you suggest that our active participation explain or say about the role of socialization in shaping who we are?
Hmm. That's a big question, the role of socialization in shaping who we are. Yeah. I think one of the things about reality TV that's really useful as kind of a teaching tool is that it kind of tends to throw together people from different backgrounds in this kind of artificial way. Like even if you go back to the original episode of The Real World, right, where you had like just seven strangers, seven very disparate people who maybe otherwise wouldn't be rooming together because our society is so stratified in so many ways. But when people from these different backgrounds come together, you start to really see the impact of their socialization in shaping who they are in different ways. So reality TV often kind of still kind of traffics in these archetypes. And by seeing these archetypes thrown together, we can really start to understand in a really magnified way the kind of pull of our personal socialization in shaping who we become as individuals.
And those archetypes can sometimes be wrong or like stigmatizing as well in a way. So the conversations that kind of happen to occur on screen are sometimes painful as well. I'm referring maybe on conversations about race or different experiences that I've read about in the book in different shows. And it was also interesting to read how you describe that reality TV shows how conservative we still are, and you explain what you refer to by saying that word conservative and how we remain regressive, right? What did you mean by that word?
So, I mean, so it's kind of a paradox, right? Because we look at these shows and it's like these extreme people and these outrageous situations, right? And we might think, you know, what does this have to do with being conservative? But I argue that it actually teaches us how we really cling to really conservative values. And I don't mean politically conservative per se, although there's some overlap there. I really mean that we think about sort of people and things and categories in ways that we've created, that are socially created, but are kind of unyielding. The way we think about what a good mother is, or, you know, even the appropriate pants to buy, right? We have very kind of narrow conservative ideas about what's legitimate and what's appropriate. And reality TV actually shows us that in all of its outrageousness, fundamentally it comes down to like really conservative ideas about what a proper woman is, or, you know, what makes a good mother and who are the bad mothers who are kind of over there and being stigmatized.
Yeah, and without giving too many spoilers, you definitely talk about different gender double standards about women, the importance of family, and other themes that people should read about. So while reading your book, it made me also think a little bit deeper about different popular reality TV shows in some other geographical contexts that I'm familiar with, whether it's, you know, wider Balkans area, Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, ex-Yugoslavia, or Turkey, where I spent 6-7 years. And I actually messaged my mom this morning because there's this one show that is broadcast in Turkey, but also in the region, and it's about women who are competing in cooking, but it is not some master chef or big, you know, Michelin star Michelin chefs who are giving the scores. It's their mothers-in-law, and so they're, you know, giving awards and score anonymously, but then the drama ensues when a mother-in-law gives bad grade to a daughter-in-law, and then it's just relying on a very typical mean stereotypes about supposedly mean mother-in-law, and it just struck me while reading your book how, again, these reality TV shows that are so popular are not necessarily always feeding into facilitating meaningful connections among people, but are actually relying on our other tendencies as social animals, including conflict, you know, all the connections, like dyads, I guess it was the name, dyads that you use in your book from different, you know, reality TV shows like Survivor, etc. So I was also curious, I know that your book is about US cultural landscape and reality TV shows from the US, but is this scholarship produced about TV shows or reality TV in other countries? Are some of your colleagues working on it that you're aware of?
Yeah, so again, my book really does focus on reality TV in a US context. Although it's interesting because I've actually done a lot of interviews with sort of outlets that are non-US based. So it seems like it's resonating with people not in a US context as well. And I think that says something about sort of the universal kind of quality, the universal appeal of reality TV. So like, yeah, there are other scholars who have written specifically, like Annette Hill's written about reality TV in the UK. Marwan Crady wrote a book about reality TV in the Arab world, which is really interesting. Again, my focus was I draw on those books in my book, but my focus was really on the U.S. But I do think it says something, right? That like reality TV is pervasive across cultural contexts, across national contexts. And I think because it's really speaking to some universal qualities, right? Like it really traffics in these archetypes, these archetypal categories that, persist across cultures. It traffics in not only stereotypes, but in these kind of simple stories where you have like the protagonist and you have the villain. And of course you want the protagonist to win out over the villain over and over. That's replicated, and I think that's something that appeals, again, across context, not just in the United States.
Mm. And it's so interesting you mentioned it now. I remember I underlined that book, where the author says how reality TV show kind of impacted huge political events in the
Yeah.
Middle East. So I was curious about it. Also, and when we speak about big political events, let alone revolutions over there, or just sociological changes in society, I know there was a lot of conversation in the region about even how Turkish, just by accident, but because they have a huge industry, soap operas have changed so many things in terms of we're changing the standards that women are usually held up to. So it's not reality TV show, but this potential of something that is portrayed and that wide media consumes is very intriguing. And I think that we need to take it seriously, which is one of the main theses of your book. So I'm curious to hear how you explain what you say is a hierarchy of acceptance when it comes to reality TV show within this framework of continued stigmatization of the genre.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people are surprised when I say the genre continues to be stigmatized. But as someone who studies it, I can tell you that it does. I mean, I was actually one time giving a talk at a bookstore about the book, and this woman kind of walks up and she's like, she was just a patron at the bookstore. She wasn't there for the talk, and she goes, what is this book about? And I was like, reality TV. And she's like, ugh, why? And she walks away. And I think that's really like emblematic of one reaction that I get, sort of why would a person with a PhD be wasting their time talking about this kind of frivolous cultural sideshow? But the answer, of course, as I explained, is that it's not a sideshow anymore. It's the main event, right? When you have a reality TV president, reality TV has become the main event. And you might not want it to be the case. You might not like reality TV as a genre. So when I say I'm like an evangelist for reality TV, I'm not out there trying to get people to like the genre. There are aspects of it I find really problematic myself, but it's important to take a good hard look at it because, as you point out, right, as I point out in the book too, it really does impact our beliefs, our attitudes, the way that we think and move in the world. And there are numerous studies showing that. And how can it not when it's nearly half of all TV? So on one hand, yeah, it's kind of surprising that it's still stigmatized because so many people are tuning in. But those are sort of two different things, whether it's socially valued and whether people actually engage in it. But yeah, there is this kind of hierarchy where the closer it is to kind of documentary, people kind of feel like it's better. It's more palatable, right? Like if it's a cooking show or one of those home decorating shows, a lot of people will actually tell me, I don't watch reality TV. And then it turns out that they do. They watch cooking shows. They watch the Great British Bake Off, or they watch HGTV, the trading plate, like one of those home decorating shows. So I think it's really interesting the way that people kind of create these hierarchies of acceptance within reality TV. And when they say, I don't really watch reality TV, they really mean a very specific kind of reality TV.
Oh, that's such a good point. Oh, yeah. Well, I have two sisters, and one of them likes the Great Baking TV show. I don't know,
Great British
the
Bake Off,
one from the British one. The other one was telling me how she enjoys watching Bachelor with her roommate, kind of as a relaxation at night after a long day at work. And after reading your book, now I'm thinking about all of that in different terms. I mean, you quote, I think it was Michelle Obama as well, who mentioned how she watches, to relax at some point. And it's interesting that you remind us that even though we might think, oh, we're not really watching because I don't have time really to watch, but I do know, as you point out, I do know about some major TV shows that are out there because people do somehow talk about it.
You
And
end up knowing,
you end up
right? Because it's
knowing
in the
exactly.
cultural ether, right? Like I
Exactly.
talk about my husband who doesn't watch reality TV at all, right? But sometimes he knows what's happening on the shows before I do because he's picking up the Washington Post or he's reading about it in the
Yeah.
New York Times.
Yeah.
And so it's out there. It's out there in the cultural ether, whether we want that to be true or not.
Yeah. But then, and you mentioned president in your last a few minutes ago, but that's the part of the book that I personally particularly enjoyed reading, because you assert that, as I mean, quote, the figures from reality TV are thoroughly unmoored from our scenes, infusing our social media and moving within our political infrastructure, end of quote. So can you talk to us a little bit about that in general, but more specifically, particularly, obviously, how can we not mention President Donald Trump and how he exploited this whole dynamic that you talk about in the book?
So there's a lot going on there. So on one hand, right, when we talk about them being unmoored from our screens, I'm really talking about how we sort of form these relationships with these people that we see on
Oh
reality
yeah.
TV, right? Media scholars call them parasocial relationships. We kind of feel like we know them, and in some ways it's closer than they are with, say, scripted characters because they're ostensibly being themselves. Now, whether or not reality TV is 100% really real, I don't think anyone thinks that it is at this point, but ostensibly they're being themselves on the screen. So you feel like you kind of know Kim Kardashian, right? Or Khloe Kardashian or Snooki. And then we can sort of tweet at them, we can buy their products, we can follow them on social media, and that really also facilitates that closeness, that kind of parasocial aspect. And that's also what I mean when I say we're kind of more actively watching it than other forms of media because we're able to engage with the stars in that way. And Donald Trump, of course, really used Twitter he really became a Twitter president, right? He really actively engaged with that platform. And I think he was really skilled at using a lot of the kind of techniques from reality TV in his candidacy and in his subsequent presidency, right? Like going down to the big reveal, right? Like when he's revealing his Supreme Court pick, he says, I'll do it, but I won't do it until prime time. So everyone kind of clamors to come in so he can reveal who his Supreme Court pick is, right? The idea of using archetypes or negative stereotypes about people, the nasty woman, the bad hombre, right? He sort of mobilized those. So he was really skilled, again, really good at using a lot of these, or even our skepticism about what's really real and what's not. Like you could look at a picture of his inauguration crowd and he could say that's not real. And we already have that kind of skepticism about the images that we see on our screen from decades of watching reality TV. So he really did become our first reality TV president, literally, but also in the sense that he was able really to use these sort of techniques and aspects of the genre.
Yeah, and you said he was the first, but one of the big, I guess, troubles or consequences of that is that he pushed the boundaries, I guess, of what a politician slash presidential candidate slash president can or should do, because now we have many more who are using the kind of rhetoric and communication style and kind of triggers that he was. So it's really consequential beyond just that one figure in terms of politics and politicians. And that's, I guess, where the danger lies. And what is the wider angle, Danielle, in this whole scholarship, or in terms of the research that you've done for this book?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you sort of hit it when you said, whether they like the shows or not, right? Like, I don't think you have to love or even like reality TV to maybe enjoy this book. But if you're looking for a critique of reality TV, that's not necessarily this book, even though I do find it problematic in a lot of ways and I am critical of it. The book itself is not a critique of reality TV. Sort of what I want people to take away from the book is that we might think of reality TV, in this sort of diminutive way, right? It's just this like thing over there. People might enjoy it. It might be fun. It might be a guilty pleasure, or might hate it, right? We might not even want to think about it because we hate it so much, but it's important to think about it because it is this cultural juggernaut. And when something is so prominent, and so many people are watching, and there's so much research showing that it impacts the way that we move and think in the world, it is important to pay attention. And that when we pay attention, it can teach us about fundamental aspects of our society, our racism, our sexism, our heteronormativity, our classism. And again, sort of how conservatively we sort of define and narrowly we define certain things and define who is legitimate and who is authentic within our culture. So don't just look away from reality TV. I think it's important to take it seriously. Even though the tone of the book isn't always serious, it's important to take reality TV seriously, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and that's why I'm so grateful for your time and for coming to Wider Angle. And just last question, almost, I mean, you perfect lead to it. It did occur to me several times while reading the book, and then at the end you write about it. How, well, wait, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of not just these narrow categories kind of continue, but also how there is a potential for different representations, right? And you do say that there is capacity to evolve, so to speak, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I don't know, hopeful turn of events in a way. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think that the kernel of that has always been there in reality TV, right? I mean, I think people often get caught up in the negative effects of reality TV and the problematic aspects, which, absolutely I agree. But at the same time, reality TV historically has been a more diverse genre than scripted media. And yes, sometimes that results in kind of stereotypical representations, and it's important to point those out as problematic. But there is something to be said for representation, racial representation. It's been on the vanguard of queer representation, going back even, to, the San Francisco season of The Real World with Pedro Zamora, who people as old as I am remember, probably, but not my students. Right? But so it's sort of been on the transgender representation, queer representation, racial representation. And so that's sort of always been there in reality TV. And we are starting to sort of see that more. In some ways, there's kind of more freedom in reality TV to kind of get away with these like forms of representation that don't necessarily exist in scripted TV. And we also see, right, that even shows that have historically been like very like white and like middle class and a certain way, like Survivor or The Bachelor, are experiencing a lot of pressure now to kind of really move toward diversifying. And so I think I think we've always seen things happening with reality TV that were interesting and different from what was happening in scripted media, but we're seeing that a little bit more now, and I think that's exciting.
Thank you so much, Danielle Lindemann, for coming to Wider Angle.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and to everyone else, stay tuned for more conversations with people from all over the globe. Talk to you soon. Bye.